So welcome back, everybody, and I hope everyone enjoyed the chance to caffeinate and to get some snacks during the break there. It's great to have everyone back with us. So we're going to be continuing the theme now of addressing some of the key challenges for the European space sector, and we have a panel starting just now and another one that's going to follow that's going to be looking at funding and investment challenges. So first session is going to be asking the question of how we can find the finances to keep European space competitive. So to explain more and to introduce the topics and then to moderate the session, I'm delighted to welcome Geraldine Nadja, Director of Commercialization, Industry and Procurement at ESA. Geraldine, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be with you to moderate this session and start with a few introductory reflections on the subject. We will start with a short introduction, and then each of our panelists will have 5 minutes to give their views on the subject of the topic and how they see. And then we will have questions and also keep some time for questions from the audience. But without further ado, let me start. Addressing the private funding gap in terms of investment. That's a big topic and one which we really have to address. Why? Very simply, this is a new space age. This is a new space age because space is now no more a publicly funded sector. It is also a privately funded sector. And this has completely changed the game already and will continue to change it. So first of all, I want to say there's a small mistake on the chart. I wish it was not a mistake. It's not 800 billion that we have, it's 80.2. And the dot has been removed somehow, probably wishful thinking on my side. But it's 80 billion public investment that we have for the year 21, and we hope to have quite a substantial increase next year because space has proven to be a tool, by the way, to address the ongoing crisis and challenges. But private investment in space is catching up. Last year, we had some 13 billion euros private investment in space, and the trend is for a rapid growth and a trend that we see continuing in the next years, despite the economic downturn. And already in Europe, while Europe was only catching, let's say, 5% of the private investment in space last year, we see that the private investment in space in Europe could double next year. So this is excellent news. But this new space age is not only a matter of public versus private funding, it's also a complete change in the way we do space. And you see, last year we had more than 1,800 satellites put into orbit, which is 4 times more than just 2 years ago. So multiplied by 4 in 2 years, that's not bad. And this will continue as well. And also 95% of these satellites are small satellites, and more than 90% are actually done from commercial operators, are privately funded satellites. So a complete change in the way we do space in just a few years. And this leads also to a new space economy. Clearly, launch prices have gone down, and they will continue to go down. We estimate that they should be divided by 3 in the next 10 years. And this will, of course, even further accelerate the use of space, which is good. Increasingly, we see also the use of space as a service. Rather than procuring infrastructure, we procure services. And this also is a different way to do space. Use of new technologies, disruptive technologies, edge computing, artificial intelligence, both for the ground and the space segments. Also, a trend towards environmental concerns for space. Not only is space extremely useful, I would even say irreplaceable for monitoring the environment, it should also be itself environmentally correct, and we are working towards green and electric propulsion. And finally, new markets. I quote one here. In orbit services, I believe will be a major new market in this decade. There again, with new functions, servicing, refueling, repairing, inspecting in space, extending the lifetime of satellites. All this will be increasingly done also towards a better use of our space infrastructure. And already now, one rocket launch almost every 2 days. Unfortunately, not yet European, but I'm sure that with the actors I see in this room, this will change soon. And I look forward to it. I look forward to Europe being fully back in the launcher competition and race. And this trend will also continue certainly this year. But this doesn't only happen across the Atlantic, by the way. This indeed happens in Europe as well, and some of you are the proof of it, that this is also a new space age for Europe, with a significant share of private investment and growing very rapidly in Europe. There are many opportunities for investors in Europe. We have excellent engineers, we have excellent technologies, so this starts to be well known. Also, public funding continues to grow, and I hope that in 1 month from now, it will be a fact that public investment in space is growing with the meeting of space ministers in Paris. And very importantly, our industry is highly competitive. We represent in Europe more or less 15% of the public funding in space. Our industry captures between 25 and 30% of the market upstream and downstream. So we are, let's say, extremely competitive with respect to the investment we have in space. And of course, this new space age, this new space race means a lot of new and existing actors, academia, startups, space and non-space companies, because space is increasingly used as a tool. And yesterday, I was discussing with a number of actors the use of space for the aviation companies, the use of space for transport, for mobility. It is clear that space is itself a very small sector, but it plays in very large arenas. And of course, the usual institutions, which are more and more active, as the European Union, which has now become a major European public actor in space. And of course, investors. So a few words on what ESA is doing about this. First of all, ESA welcomes this approach, this new space approach. We consider that there are no really new space and old space companies. This is meaningless, but there is a new space approach with a customer focus, with the use of private investment, and with a completely different approach to project management. Much more agile, much more responsive, and much more able to accept risks, because it's good to take risks, as we have seen across the ocean also. And we in Europe, we are sometimes a bit adverse to risk. We have to change this. And when I say we, it's of course in the first place the space agencies, but all the entities that are active in space. And to work on that, we at ESA have an ambition, is to see Europe really becoming a hub for space commercialization, where you can grow, develop space companies that make sense for our future. This is also the European approach. We want space to be useful for the future of the planet and for our future as a society. And to that, we have 3 tools: speed, agility, responsiveness, talent, the most important of all, innovation. We invest in brains, and capital, because it's needed to fuel the talent. And we will propose a program to that effect to our ministers in 1 month called Scale Up, supporting the scaling up of potential, let's say, highly promising companies, supporting also the development of new markets, investing through the business incubation centers, through the PhilLabs, technology brokers, and investing and stimulating the use of private investment. Business incubation centers, I don't want to dwell on it, but I will just say 1 word on the investor network. We have started putting together an investor network, and we are working with our colleagues of the European Commission on their Cassini initiative. In just 18 months, we have signed 18 partnerships with private investors, as well as an agreement with the European Commission, EUSPA, and the European Investment Fund and European Investment Bank. I believe that this is really the tool to stimulate private investment in space in Europe. And I really look forward to the effects. We start to see them already. And next year, I'm sure this, let's say, this investor community will really start building on new topics for space. So with that, I will stop. Together, we invest, we innovate for the European industry competitiveness and commercial success. Thank you. And now I will pass the floor to my colleagues, and I will ask them to as I said, make a small introduction. We will start with Guillaume. Guillaume Delabrosse, you are Head of Unit for Innovation, Startups and Economics in the DG DEFI of the European Commission, and we work very well together as well. Please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, can you hear me well? Okay. No, thank you very much, Geraldine, for that kind introduction and for that brilliant landscape. I think there is not much to say after your introduction, which was excellent, and I could subscribe to all what you said. So, including to the last words, saying that we cooperate very well on that matter. But I mean, from a Commission's perspective, so basically, why do we want this new space approach to really speed up and grow in Europe? I think indeed you said it, it's about new technologies, it's about new industrial processes, but actually it has a very positive effect on the entire ecosystem. I think it has a very positive effect as well on primes and basically on the way collectively we do space. So I think at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation for everybody. So you said it, there is no need to, on one side, to have the new space actors, on the other side, to have the incumbents. I think it has a very positive effect on the entire ecosystem, and it's exactly what we are looking for. So in the Commission, we are very supportive to that new space dimension, new space approach. And here there are three leverages that I'd like to mention. One is the access to finance. You said it, it's about capital. We know that challenge number one for many startups, many new entrants, is really the access to capital and getting the funding they need to scale up in Europe. So we are, together with the European Investment Fund, trying to put together this 1 billion Cassini Investment Fund. The idea is really to encourage more VCs to invest in space and actually to de-risk their investment in space. So we are talking to many VCs. We're indeed building up that network of investors. But actually what matters at the end of the day is really that we get investments of VCs in startups. We see very positive traction, more and more VCs attracted, generalist VCs or specialized VCs, which is a good news. The key challenge will be for bigger size tickets. So we have many VCs ready to invest in Series A, pre-seed, seed, and Series A. But when it comes to Series B, C, this is where we are facing still big challenges and where we need to catch up compared to the US. Still under capital, where we need to really prepare the ground is access to loans. We know that many startups are looking for equities, but at some point, a startup is not willing to dilute its ownership anymore and wants to get access to loans. So this is where we are working together with the European Investment Bank and with national commercial banks as well to see whether we can really facilitate access to loans for the startup companies. Here, the key word is changing a bit the mindsets and ensuring that those banks are willing to go for more risky approach as well. So access to capital is one. The second key leverage is indeed changing completely the relationship between public organizations and the startups. You said it as well. We need to change the way we procure, the way we behave, basically, with startups. And this is something that we are trying to initiate. So basically to act as anchor customer, buying services instead of imposing too many specific requirements and being on the back, really, of the startups. Actually, the point is to give them the freedom that they need. And for us, to act as an anchor customer, buying the services, and giving the freedom to the startups the way they want to get organized. I think this is really important. But it's a big change for large organizations like the Commission or like ESA, where we have procurement rules which are quite complex to change. But we are on it. We are on it. First case will be Copernicus contributing missions, where, as you know, we want to sign up to 12 contracts already early next year. And where we will be acting as an anchor customer. The second big chance or opportunity will be secure connectivity, where there will be some lots indeed for new space companies as well, where the Commission will act as an anchor customer. And the last and the third opportunity will be on launches, where we want to boost the development of new launcher systems through Commission acting as an anchor customer as well and buying services. My last point, last leverage to me, and I think it's an important market, including for new space companies, is the synergies between space and defense. Actually, defense customers are looking for agility and responsiveness, and this is exactly what new space companies can offer to them as well. So de facto, what we see is that we have more and more defense ministries teaming up with new space companies to buy services, test new services, and then actually design long-term contract with those companies to procure services. So I think this is an area, this is a big driver at European level, these synergies between space and defense. This is something that we want to get organized. But I think this market is an important market as well for new space companies. And to me, new space companies, in a way, are the sovereignty of tomorrow. So we really need to ensure that the synergies will be indeed lead to more market opportunities for new space companies.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Thank you. And I pass the floor to François. So François Alter, your advisor to the president at the French Space Agency, the Centre National d'Études Spatiales.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be there to talk about the new space. And in fact, it's very, very hard to talk after Géraldine and Guillaume, because I should say that we are very aligned, in fact, in this landscape and the tools to be put in place. But what I can tell is that in France, it's already up and running, in fact. We started, when I arrived at CNES, there was only one startup every 2 years, which were created around space economy. It was very, very few. And at this moment, there was perhaps 2 billion euros private investments done worldwide, and it was mainly in US. And now what we see is that we have one new startup coming at CNES door, knocking at CNES door every week, and that's quite huge. And in fact, it's because there's some enthusiasm of people wanting to be the next Elon Musk, but also it's because there's a lot of support from public support. You have seen that public spending is very important in space, and is in fact the main source of spending actually. But if this main source of spending must be also spent in the right sense with this newcomers, because they have not the same time scale than traditional space players. It's not, Géraldine mentioned that we must not oppose old space and new space, and it's a new space process and new space of doing things. But that's true that this new small player have not the same time to survive, in fact, because usually they need they have only money for a few months when they raise money. So they need to have public agencies, public actors, very more agile in their decisions. And it's exactly what we have done in France with a complete program to support startups called Connect by CNES, from ideation with hackathons, support of incubation with ISABIC. We have also accelerators, and what we are providing also is technical support, and it's very important for startups and these new space players to have the talents and to have all the technical expertise which can be provided for them very quickly. And also Guillaume mentioned a lot about the need of equity funding, and it's exactly what we have done. We spent more than 55 million euros the last 2 years to invest in startups. And the startups have already raised more than 500 million euros. So it's a lot of money, in fact, compared to the fact that there was nothing 5 years ago. And it's what we need with the European Commission, with EIF. We need, in fact, to grow and to grow very quickly, because in US and in China, it's something which is already some tens of billion euros spendings.
Thank you, François. And I pass the floor to David. David Willits, Chairman of the UK Space Agency.
Thank you very much indeed, Geraldine. And for me, having just become the chair of the UK Space Agency, I'm very aware that our British model in rising to this challenge is historically a bit different. We've always had a relatively small public sector. Our space agency itself was only created in 2011. We don't really have the capacity to run large in-house technology programs within the space agency. For those, we look to the excellent expertise of ESA, and many of our national political public priorities are delivered through our role in ESA. And one of our main aims in the space agency is simply, with the relatively modest budget we've got, to promote private investment. So we've ended up with a different balance, tending to have a smaller public budget, and partly because of the City of London and its relatively large VC community, a different balance towards more private investment. And there's no right model, but that has been historically how the British system has developed. I think what we're talking about today is in this session is the crucial question of how we find the money. Where does the money actually come from? And obviously, as we have relatively low levels of public spending, I'm always very aware of the challenges of how you get more public investment in space. And here I thought a word that Geraldine used is crucial, which is useful. Explaining that space is useful. If we have a space budget created and spent by space experts on the technology challenges and scientific challenges that most interest people already in the space sector, that constrains the finance you can access. As soon as you can get people in other government departments who see that space services are a means of delivering anything from better agricultural monitoring to, above all, their green objectives, then you start accessing a much wider range of budgets and you get many more supporters. And we had an interesting example of this in Britain recently, involving, and I hope you'll forgive me referring to a British obsession, involving the royal family, because Prince William denounced the waste of money on space projects. He meant globally. I think he was going for Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but he said there's so much money wasted on space when we should be solving the environmental problems down here on Earth. And that opened up a very illuminating debate when at last people in the space community were able to say, hang on, we're quite useful in delivering green and environmental objectives. It's not simply vanity projects and a luxury good. And winning that argument, persuading lots of outsiders who are never going to be experts on space of the value of what we do is key. We then try to promote public-private mix, and we've got various agencies doing that. We have the Satellite Applications Catapult. In many ways, it's not which I created when I was the minister, in many ways drawing on the fantastic German model of the Fraunhofers, a mix of public and private money. And one of the main functions of the Satellite Applications Catapult, based at Harwell, where there's a really lively space tech cluster, by the way, is to persuade people who are not currently involved in space, especially in the commercial sector, the insurance industry, for example, that high quality EO data enhances their capacity to run their insurance companies very efficiently and get a better, more accurate, quicker assessment of hurricane damage, whatever, for the British insurance industry. So we're always trying to find ways in which we can persuade outside players of the value of space. I very much agree with I'm very excited indeed by what Geraldine was saying about the ESA agenda of promoting more private startups and also, of course, clearly an EU agenda. We try to do that in Britain through the British Business Bank, which acts as an anchor public investor in new VC funds, and indeed was the key anchor investor that got Seraphim going, which I saw referred to in Geraldine's presentation, and there will be other examples as well coming down the track. So we try to act as a core anchor investor to get a wider range of venture capital investment. It's quite frustrating, however. We've got 1 or 2 VC funds that specialize in space technology. We've got a lot of other general technology funds. And another thing to do is to reach out beyond the space sector to investors who, certainly in the UK, are probably more comfortable investing in software, in digital startups, and persuading them that they should go upstream a bit and see where some of the data that they are investing in actually comes from, and get our wider general technology funds investing in space as well. But it's very exciting what is happening now, and I'm so pleased that at this forum it's possible for us to compare notes, and I hope also find ways in which we can collaborate. The other thing you do observe is a lot of these VC funds do not wish to invest on their own. They want to put together 2 or 3 funds that co-invest. It gives them greater confidence. And the ideal scenario for us is a technical tick in the box from ESA, which really enhances the credibility of a program, and then 2 or 3 VC funds coming in partnership after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Well, thank you very much. We've had now the views of the public, let's say, stakeholders, the Commission and space agencies. Now we turn to industry. So Laurent Jaffard, you are the head of space system strategy in Airbus Defence and Space. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. So Airbus Defence and Space, we're playing in a matrix, if you want, on telecommunication, Earth observation, exploration, and with end customers in defense, institutions, and commercial. We're covering the whole range, and each segment have its own logic and follows its own principles. We are playing upstream, manufacturing. We're playing downstream, operating services. And we are facing competition worldwide. We're facing competition within Europe, which we welcome. And we are also partnering, teaming with new players. And I personally don't like the term new space, because once it's announced it's new, the day after is no longer new. And we're talking about next space. So next space is how we are collaborating together across the industry, across the ecosystem. The fuel is money, budgets. We have in Europe increasing budgets request for the next ministerial conference at ESA of 25% for we'll see the confirmation. The European budgets have increased with the MFF, but we are also in the middle of a geopolitical crisis, an economical crisis with a hyperinflation. And the promises may actually melt with the inflation. When talking about startups is all about speed. And working with startup is something that we welcome, because it allows us to think and to work differently. We have several ways to work with startups, just commercial partnership. And sometimes we have equity play, either directly as Airbus or through Airbus Venture and its fund. When we talk about taking risk, what I have not heard so far is talking about reward. And the companies are there to satisfy shareholders, stakeholders in their countries, in their communities, providing employment, providing high-paid and valuable talent, an opportunity to shine globally. And when we talk about rewards today, when we compare ourselves in Europe with the US, we don't play with the same rules. So we have to think, how do we reward the industry for the risk it takes? And a company like Airbus is willing and has been taking risk in some investments because they were anchor customers, reassuring the financial markets that there would be a payback on the risk taken and rewarding the shareholders to take investment risks. So when thinking about how do we work in this ecosystem with startups, we have to be prepared to succeed quickly, but also to fail fast and pivot. And we need to keep this item of reward in mind.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Harald Gruber, you're head of the Digital Infrastructure Division in the European Investment Bank. So talking about funding.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to illustrate to this audience the perspective of a public policy bank like the European Investment Bank, which is the bank owned by the member states of the European Union. And as a result of that, in its financing, it needs to pursue policy goals. Now, the overriding policy goals are now environment, so basically climate action, and innovation, digitalization. Clearly, the space industry can contribute to both of those targets. I mean, clearly, Earth observation and all kinds of things that clearly are a key component in basically in tackling the climate challenges. And clearly also digitalization. It is, it is built on digitalization and it promotes digitalization. So therefore, the policy aim is very clear. And then last but not least, space is also a key ingredient in the European Investment Bank's contribution to security and defense initiative in Europe. So, it is clearly a targeted sector for the bank operation. Now, the bank can basically use its own funds, which is basically passing on funds that it raises at international financial markets at AAA rating and passing it on for projects to clients, or combining its funding also with fundings from, for instance, the European institutions like the Commission. So this is the kind of activity the bank does. Now, what the key question that we are talking today is about how can we raise private funding to the space sector. This is the key challenge in Europe because Europe is far behind in this. There's quite a lot of financing from the public sector, but Europe is sluggish in basically mobilizing private funding for investments in Europe. Now, there are some structural impediments which are widely known. For instance, it's basically the structure of the European financial markets. So basically, they are typically less towards risk-based instruments, venture capital, and so on. And the investors are less keen on taking basic commercial risks. This is one of the key limiting factors in Europe. And so in part, we can do something about that, but it's about investor sentiment. We have to see what are the incentives of how we can do that. Clearly, it's a question of education that the bank is doing quite a lot, also basically trying to promote new investor styles, new investment behavior. And then you can also basically mobilize additional investments. It's a question about also the sheer amount of resources that are involved. Now, the space sector has one of the apart from the perspectives of having good growth opportunities, but has some limiting factors that shy away investors compared to other sectors. There's those long development cycles that typically are in the space sector. If you have constellations or those kinds of things, this have very long development cycles. So this is clearly something that you have to educate investors about and taking them. So, okay, you have to take the long view. And then there is also the possibility or the limited possibility to assess the market risk, because some investments are really of the very new type. So there's no benchmark that you can use in a comfortable way. So you have to really get into genuine risk type of things. And these are the kind of things that we are trying to tackle by educating the sector and basically also putting our own money behind it and mobilizing additional public sector funding combined with these activities. Now, the IB approach is basically typically that you will see from a commercial bank. We do our due diligence. Clearly, it's to some extent in a more detailed way, because we have also to make sure that the projects are on good track, because we are publicly accountable for the money that we are using. I don't go through in detail through these different points, but again, here we list the basically the reasons why the space sector is so key, so interesting for us to develop joint instrument with the Commission and with public sector funding. So, I mean, in the current financing programs, there are different windows in there, which basically are very much attuned to mobilizing funding also from the European Investment Bank, and therefore we are developing different approaches of how we can mobilize these kind of fundings. And here, this is the typical, that's the list sort of the financial instruments that I think. Number 4, it's sort of the typical own risk, own resources funding of the European investments, which goes typically to relatively large, well-established corporates. We have done that to a fair extent over the past years, and we are continuing to do that. But what is new in here, it are the other instruments, basically. Of course, it has been already mentioned, the fund business, which is done by the European Investment Fund, which is a subsidiary of the European Investment Bank. And there have been several funds now that have been established for catering for the space sector. Then we do basically the kind of very interesting instrument is basically the venture debt. It is for relatively young companies which are rapidly growing and which have a very large financing need compared to their budget, to their balance sheet. And this is the kind of financing that typically goes towards sort of equity financing. And the problem is that this equity financing tends to be very dilutive. So basically, it takes out incentives from the companies, it expropriates them. And therefore, we have developed the so-called venture debt product, which basically, it looks like equity, but is de facto a debt instrument. So basically, does not dilute the owners of their instrument. And it has been very high effective in also in this sector. I mean, it's effective also in many other sectors, which are where you need for rapidly scalable business, very rapidly rising financing needs compared to the balance sheet of the company. And so it's the kind of instruments that we need to develop, also because the funds that are coming from abroad, they're not shy in investing in Europe, and they basically they put in very large amounts for relatively small companies, and therefore, of course, that then there's lack of control then for European owners then of the companies, and so that's why a lot of talents and a lot of very promising companies, they wander off Europe because simply they are strictly speaking, simply bought by funds or by investors from outside Europe. So that's why we need also to have a competing instrument which basically induces European talents to stay in Europe, European companies to stay in Europe, and at the same time have the incentive to grow and to have also a competitive pressure at the same time. So it is a fine balance that needs to be done, but we have to do that, because otherwise private investment will basically not make sure that basically European talents and European capital stays in Europe. So to conclude my introductory remarks, so basically there is a significant investment gap, private sector investment gap in space, and we need to tackle that. But on the other hand, we do have mechanisms put in place which probably will be quite useful in helping to tackle these instruments. And of course, we need to create an overall business-friendly investment environment in Europe for this. So I would Thank you very much in the meantime.
Thank you very much, Harold. And I think you have come exactly to the point for the issue on investment. We don't only need investment, we need European investment and retain our talents in Europe. This is really important. And thank you for reminding us. So now we come to questions, and I will start with Guillaume. So you mentioned the Cassini initiative, which was launched last year by the European Commission. Last year, which is going to be a game changer for new space. So how do you see the articulation between new space entities and incumbents? And perhaps tell us a few words about where you stand with this initiative.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for that question. So indeed, what we have tried to come up with Cassini is a kind of toolbox, if you want, for startups where they can select what they need and get what they need. I give you a few examples. We know that startups sometimes develop very good technology, but they need flight heritage for that technology or certain payloads. With Cassini, we have a program for that, but we can offer for free to those startups looking for flight heritage. So we can offer for free basically the aggregation services on a platform that we procure and the launch services. So this is a very powerful tool, I mean, again, for startups, because it gives them for free the flight heritage. And we know that flight heritage for new entrants is a prerequisite then to enter into the commercialization. So that's a concrete instrument. Another one, as I was mentioning, is indeed mobilizing the entire financial community. So we had a good example of the EIB, EIF. We are closely cooperating as well with the European Investment Council, the European Innovation Council, sorry, the EIC, because actually we have different instruments, serving different purposes. So we can mobilize grants or equities with the EIC. We can mobilize equities, smaller size tickets with the EIF, and then we can mobilize loans with the EIB. So what we are trying to provide for is really a one-stop shop where companies can really see what they need and then have the right interlocutor and the right pipeline of discussion with the different EU bodies. When it comes to the articulation between a new space and incumbents, as I was saying, I think it's a win-win situation, because in a way, and it was very good to hear from Laurent actually that point, that it creates a new way of working as well for the big players. So more agility, more risk-taking, and I think indeed, I mean, the same way Commission and ESA needs to change the way we're working with certain companies, I think that applies as well to large companies and the primes. And we see that actually it creates really benefits to all of them. What we see as well is that we basically startups are just not willing to be considered as usually as, you know, they are one part of a big supply chain. They want to be treated differently. And sometimes actually primes are even customers of the startups. So we see it changes as well completely the relationship between startups and customers and large primes. So in a way, for me, it's a win-win situation for the entire ecosystem. Commissioners say that once we need to change the way we do space, and this is exactly what's happening today.
Thank you very much. François, you mentioned that indeed there are already many existing mechanisms. So can you tell us about the public and private funding mechanisms which are available in France to support space industry, and perhaps tell us a bit about France 2030?
Okay, so in fact, we discussed a lot about the need of public spending for space and new space. We in France during the ISC, the French Prime Minister in fact announced that there was a 9 billion euros. There will be a 9 billion euros investment in space in France for the next 3 years. That means it's 30% more than the last 3 years. And in this amount, there is a program called France 2030, where 1.5 billion euros will be invested in new space activities. In fact, it's already up and running. We are working very quickly now to make a lot of RFP. We can, in fact, invest through state aids, so grants, etc. But as also and mainly as a non-core customer for demonstration of services. So, for instance, we invested, we launched RFP for in-orbit services, for space situation awareness. We will launch RFP for to buy some services for data images, etc., etc. So we have a huge program to invest in newcomers, but this is, as you mentioned, also with the traditional players. What we see in France is that these new players are working very closely with traditional players because they need their competencies. They can be customers, they can be technology providers, etc. So to give you two examples, we have a US-French companies called Loft Orbital who bought, I think, more than 10 satellites from Airbus. It's an example, very concrete example of what is new space, in fact. We have Kineis who are buying instruments for their constellation from Thales. So it's exactly this new ecosystem and the public spendings we are providing, in fact, and the private spending we can find through funding rounds with VCs, with corporates, etc., can provide, in fact, new customers, new technology providers.
Thank you, François. David, you mentioned the use of space for many different and larger sectors, and in particular, the need to make sure that we are doing useful things for public policy. So what do you think could be the sources of public funding for space other than that of the space agencies?
Well, I mentioned some examples like agricultural budgets, green technology initiatives, especially after COP26. Another area where we had an initiative was helping with development. There are lots of developing countries that are going to use, as we know, satellite services, but instead of going through some of the intermediate steps of more conventional physical infrastructure that they're never going to invest in. So we devoted some of our aid budget to promoting the use of space to help developing countries with their services. The other user that I wanted to touch on was defense and security. Is this a place to mention that, Geraldine? Because, and I think it brings together some themes in several of the sessions we've had at this conference. In Britain, our defense and security people have become much more interested in space recently. To be frank, in Britain, often it was essentially the special relationship with the US that meant we had access to all their space services and did not really do much by way of secure space services of our own. I think there's been a big shift in thinking in our MOD in the last few years, and now they're investing significantly more in space-based services on top of the classic comms service in which Airbus plays an important role. And that has good and bad elements. It certainly means, and I suspect we're not alone on this, that defense and security spend on space services across Europe is now growing very substantially. And they look around, and certainly in the UK, they also make investments in space startups, which they see as having security, significance, and defense potential. And in many ways, they have rescued space companies. One Cambridge technology entrepreneur said to me at one point, describing the old world, he said, it's very odd, the security agencies are absolutely concerned about the value of this technology wouldn't possibly let me sell it to the Chinese. On the other hand, I can't find a UK public agency that will fund it themselves either. So the technology, the defense concern has in turn led to extra spending. There are, however, some risks in this. First of all, defense thinking is requirement thinking. They start with defining a requirement, and that becomes a line in a defense budget. And in order to promote the private sector, it is also important to be totally pragmatic and opportunistic. A private company comes up with an idea, an imaginative use that no planner or public official had previously thought of. And if you put in a bit of money, you'll help it to market. And it's very important that you don't just always say, well, what is the requirement that we have specified in our strategy to fund it? Another problem is security classification of people working in space. There's a real danger when the defense and security decisions are taken by a relatively small group of people with high security classifications, and the people on the commercial and civil side, including spending public money and not necessarily at the table, not necessarily participating in the decision. So there's a challenge of coordination we find in the UK. And then thirdly, and this touches on the discussion we had yesterday, security can mean a lot of different things. And this is a point I think that's relevant about secure connectivity as it's used in Europe. Secure can mean a very hard-edged, serious, high-level classification, often NATO-linked program. And to be honest, NATO would not regard most of what we do in Europe, including things we call secure, as really security in the NATO sense. Sometimes in Europe, they would regard the use of secure, as in secure connectivity, as a much less rigorous sense, that it would be quite good to have a service which was not so weakly, was not exposed to cyber attack, which maybe had some protections from phishing and spoofing and all the other risks. So that's a useful low-level security. It's not the same thing as our security view would regard as security. And if it's to be that type of level of security, I think it should be possible for nations that have these capacities and contribute, to contribute, because you don't need the same levels of security coverage as if it is at NATO. And one of my dreams, speaking now as a Brit, is I still hope that as the British relationship with the EU improves, which we need to work on, and we need to find a good, mature way in which we can continue to work together. I think that's the type of initiative in which I would like to see Britain contributing in the future.
Thank you very much, David. Laurent, you mentioned that you already work with space startups and emerging companies. So do you think there is a role for companies such as yours, legacy space companies, to support these emerging companies in their successful entry onto the market?
So simple answer is yes. We are working with companies that are offering innovative solutions to problems that we've tried to solve in a maybe more traditional way. The key on working with those companies is a question of sustainability. Are those companies going to be around for the long term? Are those companies going to be sustainable in the service they are delivering? And what is interesting, and I echo what was said previously, we don't necessarily just want to be a customer to the startups. In fact, the examples given on Loft Orbital is we are a supplier to a startup. We are able to morph ourselves at the various levels around the value chain where we add the most value to their venture. They also come to us because they have to deliver a reliable service to customers who are not interested to have interruptions of services after just a few years. They also are able to raise money because they have customers who are taking a risk to be an anchor customer for the long run, not just for 2 or 3 years. And here the institutions and the public sector has a role to play, and it is playing that role, but could do more in being an anchor customer, and against which you have a a credible signature to go and raise debt and to discuss with the financiers. So we work with them. Not surprisingly, sometimes a bit annoyingly, some of our own talents are moving to those startups. And sometimes we may actually see them coming back. So this elevator between the ecosystem, I think, is a virtuous circle and not a vicious circle. But what we need to be careful of is to see an inflation of salaries like we're seeing in the Silicon Valley, where ultimately traditional space companies are not even able to recruit talents because they're all going to work for the GAFAMs. So we need to be conscious of that.
Yes, you're right. And by the way, this type of back and forth movement, I would also like to see it for the space agencies. I think it could be very helpful. And
I confirm. We have a lot of
Yes.
CNES employees going to
Yeah.
startups now, and it's very
and also
Interesting.
putting together some intrapreneurship also within space agencies, which I know you do as a legacy company, as an established company. But okay, thank you. Harald, okay, let's go a bit deeper in finance then. What do you think should be the European financing conditions for companies operating in the space sector?
Yeah, I mean, depends very much on the nature of the companies. I mean, normally the private sector investment environment probably there's scope for improvement in the sense that, I mean, okay, there are for the larger corporates, yes, there is business there. There is a lot of public sector perspectives, but okay, there's probably the thing is that perhaps more, if the private sector would be more active, then there would also be more ferment in that. But really the tricky bit is basically, as I mentioned to you before, it's basically how can I stimulate investors to invest in those small companies that have a high growth potential, that have talents there, that have a good idea, but they need substantial financial resources to grow. And financial resources which are there with a considerable risk for technological development and also for market risk. And the best way normally to deal with those kind of risk is basically trying to pool those risks in a way that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you have to find mechanisms by which these kind of resources can be pooled. I mean, one can see how this works in other contexts. Clearly, corporate venturing, as we mentioned before, it's one way to do it. I mean, because basically those corporates have the insight, but they may not always have full alignment of interest. So basically, sometimes then if the company goes through, there are concerns of basically passing on to competitors some key knowledge, things like that. So, on the other hand, the company to grow, it needs to have a diversified customer base. So it's those kind of things that you need to trade off. So therefore, having a sort of an investment fund or an investment vehicle that basically provides growth capital, it's better equipped to find those kind of things. So all in all, I think what we need, first of all, is to have more resources, absolutely more capital, private sector capital in that, and basically educate that capital to take more risk in companies that are based in Europe. So it's quite a tall order, but I think we have to tackle that.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a few audience questions which I would like to ask now to the panels, perhaps starting with you, Guillaume, and maybe also of relevance to François. In addition to the fundings which are promoted by ESA, for instance, Business Incubator or other business incubation centers, what other fundings do you have for non-university related companies in pre-seed stage? That's the first question. And second question, so this one is for you both, I think, because I believe there are tools both on the EC side and on the national side. And also, identifying all these other fundings and all the fundings available, is there a portal that brings them together? To my knowledge, not yet, but I think it's an excellent suggestion, but I should not be the one to answer. So perhaps Guillaume and then François.
Yep. No, thank you very much for that question. When it comes to the portal, I mean, we know that we are trying to streamline the way you can get access to the information. For instance, I mean, on the DEFIS, so my DG, we have a web page, cassini.eu, where you can get all the information related to the funding opportunities and the different programs we have for the companies and events that we plan where you can register. So I strongly encourage you, I mean, it's just one click, so it doesn't take much of your time, and have a look, and actually you can get the information that you need at first glance. Next challenge will be indeed that we elaborate. So next challenge to elaborate something together with ESA, so that we can ensure that there is one single stop shop on access to different mechanisms for startups. I mean, we know that startups have very limited resources and therefore need to get access to in an easy manner to information. Next advice is really for that kind of ecosystem to participate in large startup events, like the next one will be the Web Summit. There will be a big event as well in Rome. So because here you can really team up. I mean, basically we organize what we call Cassini matchmaking, where we bring together VCs community together with startups, where we can bring together startups and corporates. So it's really the place, 2 days, for instance, where we can get access to partners when it comes to funding partners or to private investors or customers. So we strongly encourage you to be quite proactive and to participate in such events. Of course, I mean, we open door policy, so we stand ready as well to see you and provide you. I mean, well, we can go for speed dating meetings, for instance. Well, this is something that we organize to help you in getting access to funding. When it comes to the pre-seed, we're in touch with many VCs interested to invest in pre-seed rounds or seed rounds. So here we can act as an honest broker. We are not the one at the commission taking the investment decision. Each VC is taking its decision depending on the due diligence, depending on their priorities, on their risk profile. So it's up to them, but we can facilitate and act as an honest broker and bring you in touch with that ecosystem of VCs. So that's something that we are very happy to do. Last remark, if I may, on Harald mentioned the need to educate the financial community. This is something that we have done together over the last 6 months, educating the financial community. So what does it mean? It means explaining the logic of the space markets, how we can make business in space, the risks attached to that. And actually, I mean, we see that we've gained traction in the financial community. We have more and more VCs interested. We mentioned, I mean, general VCs, but specialized VCs as well, ready to invest. At least they are talking more and more to startups. So we are slowly, but actually not so slowly, catching up. And I very much hope that all the startups looking for equities will have the opportunity to strike deals very soon with that ecosystem of VCs.
Okay. In fact, for Pre-Seed, we have already up and running program. One is if you are looking for R&D support. In fact, the best way is to go to our pitch days. We are in fact we are programming a lot of pitch days each year now. For instance, there is a new one about sustainable space in the next month, and then you provide your project and you have a contract in the day. We sign the contract, and you have you have the money just after the pitch day. After that, if you are looking for equity, in fact, we have something which is called the space ticket. It's convertible obligation. We can invest, in fact, a few thousand of euros in your company, and that's something which is working quite well, because we are doing perhaps more than between 10 and 15 new investments per year. And if you are also looking, we can be a customer. In fact, NES can be customer of startups. We have more and more. We are trying a lot of technologies, and we are very happy with that. So we can just be in touch with you. And for that, we settled, as I mentioned, the Connect by NES program. And if you just ask the Connect by NES team, you will have somebody assigned for you, would be your point of contact, and try to see what can be done with NES. In fact, it's very simple.
Thank you, François. David, you mentioned insurance firms as being potential future customers of space. Which role, so it's a question from the audience, from Marc Meyer, which role could insurance firms play for an in-orbit ecosystem and the space debris problem?
Well, I mean, the more that, I think there will be intermediary companies. I don't think they will necessarily be involved in the funding or the creation of the constellations of satellites. But we've got in the UK, and again, there are across Europe, a whole network of intermediary, exciting startups that are using the data that's now coming from space and really doing the smart software to convert data into usable information. They in turn thrive if they get long-term contracts from insurance companies or others for the use of their services. They much prefer those, and it can help get them funded and get started. So we're seeing a growth of that sector, and the Catapult is another one of these intermediary bodies that links up ultimate end users like insurance companies and smart intermediaries. I would just make one other comment, if I may, because I realize there's something we haven't referred to so far in this session. I believe it's a phenomenon on the continent of Europe. It's certainly a very powerful phenomenon in the US and the UK, which is the collapse in prices of technology companies. And this is one of the most fraught issues in Britain at the moment. Is there are a lot of companies that are having to accept that their valuation is nothing like as high as they thought it was. And there are investors coming in saying we're not willing, they may need a further round of investment, but they have to accept that this is not as they thought. They're on a neat trajectory where there was a massively higher valuation for each round. They haven't to go through the recognition that the new round of investment may value the company at less than the previous round did. And public bodies have to accept this reality. There is a temptation for public bodies to kind of soften the blow and maybe not always be realistic on valuations. If public bodies prop up exaggerated valuations of companies whose value has actually been affected by the tech crash, they won't be serving the growth of the sector. They will be damaging it by protecting unrealistic valuations. And I have to say, I think that's going to be one of the trickiest issues over the next 12 to 24 months.
Thank you, Dave. This was actually a question I had in mind for Harald, but I would like now perhaps to come also. I saw there were two questions from the audience. The first one was not you, Olivier, behind. Yeah, the first one was over there in the back, and then one question here, and then you, Olivier, please.
So I'm Tommy from North Base, Finland. You have not discussed the, shall we say, considerations of international investment. Many things we do, I mean, in general, and for instance, we make ground stations in Finland, which may be considered a critical infrastructure or strategic asset or whatever. So if we take private investment in Finland, that's already one step. If we take it outside Finland, it's another. We take it outside Europe, it's a third step. If we take it from a potentially hostile nation, it's yet another issue. Just to illustrate, we take a VC, corporate VC from Germany invest in us. It may mean that no other corporations can then be served by us. We take an American VC, and they only want to look for the exit, and then we take Chinese money, and then we are a potential security hazard. So it's a very big step and consideration, which of course limits. So it's something to consider. But do you have clever comments for this?
Guillaume?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to take this one because actually, I mean, we see that as a big risk to go for non-European investments. And I was mentioning the fact that new entrants in space for us, I mean, Commission, we see that very much as the sovereignty of tomorrow in Europe. So David mentioned the articulation between space and defense. I was mentioning that as well before. Clearly, there's going to be a big driver as well for that market. So if you go for non-EU investors, this may have strong limitations for your company then to team up with defense at some point, because you will have to pass security considerations. And if you're in the hands of non-EU investors, this will be problematic. So that's why, and we know that's a big challenge, because if we tell you that on one side, basically stay European, but on the other side, we are unable to attract more EU private investors, of course, you will not resist at some point. I mean, the companies will have to scale up, make business, and therefore they will look for non-EU investment. So we have an issue there, that's clear, and that's why, I mean, we are trying to speeding up the unlocking of private investments in the EU. It takes some time, but really when it comes to selecting your non-EU investors, be quite selective.
David, you
I wanted
knew,
to
you knew
ask-
I wanted to ask you the question on that, so please
I
go
wanted
ahead.
to ask Guillaume a question, which is whether he regards a NATO member state as a non-secure or secure investor.
Good question. We may have to differentiate, but clearly, no. I mean, there are certain eligibility rules, and you can't play with that. So clearly, when here I'm referring to the European Defence Fund, for instance, where you have certain eligibility rules, and you know that as part of the European Defence Fund, we more and more have space-related programs as well. But clearly, from broader perspective, NATO. For investment coming from NATO allies are not to be considered as non-NATO investment. That's clear.
Okay, we have a question over there, please.
Thank you. Monika Krzyżanowska, Cloudfaro. It's a small Polish company. I have, in fact, even two questions. First is for Mr. Gruber. It's a bit connected with the previous one. You said that there is not enough private funding in space in Europe, and you quoted a number of reasons why, well, how to incentivize. But would it mean that you think that there is enough private funding at all in Europe for this type of activity? And the second question is for Mr. Alte. I wanted to ask you, what should happen next? I mean, once you have incubed all those companies, what is your ideal scenario for them? Should they fend for themselves? Should, let's say, Airbus or another big company take over? Because there is still a long way to grow. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, is there enough funding also for other sectors? Clearly, I mean, principally, if you ask to talk to operators, they never have enough money. So that's the thing. The question is rather, I mean, if you have established a policy aim that's basically promoting the space sector in Europe because it's of political sort of priority, then you would like, and you know that you can't do that only by public means. So you have to mobilize private investment as a result of that. And therefore, you look what other countries do. I mean, you then start to compare it. Why is the US attracting so much money in space and we are not? That's the key question. And then you see that there is a gap. So that's why, I mean, if you look at the car sector, I think Europe doesn't have a concern on that one. So, I mean, it depends a little bit of what you use as a benchmark.
François, quickly, because
Yes,
we have one
quickly.
last question.
In
then
fact,
we'll-
we can compare space to the healthcare sector for that area of scenario of startups. I mean that it's much more mature about startups. You have the big pharmas and biotech. And what we see is that sometimes biotech are bought by big pharmas. Sometimes biotech are becoming big pharmas. All is open, in fact, and it's exactly what we will see in the space sector, certainly, and we will be very happy about all that kind of scenarios, in fact.
I have one last question because it's 19 and we have to finish on time, and it's to you, Laurent, from the audience as well. You mentioned risks, risk-taking and the need for return on investment. How to encourage to take higher risk, and how to improve the fact that indeed in Europe we might not always be taking enough risk. How can we improve that?
So, without being disrespectful to anyone, but some people believe that a bigger stick is equivalent to a carrot. You take risk if you see a carrot, and we need to see a market which is maybe in Europe a bit too small. We need to expand this market. We need to create not a fragmented market like it is today, but rather a unified market. We need to keep on working on large programs that are triggering innovation, that are pushing the industry to offer great solutions, not only to the European market, but worldwide. And ultimately, when we compare the contractual types we have in Europe with the US for high-risk technologies, they go cost plus, we go firm fixed price, and therefore you cannot take unreasonable risk in a firm fixed price context.
Okay, thank you. I know there are many more questions from the audience. What I suggest is that perhaps you use the breaks with the panelists to ask the questions directly to them. I want to thank you. It was very interesting and I learned a lot. So thank you very much, and thanks for the organizers.
Thank you, Joe. So just to echo Geraldine's words there, thank you all to all of our panelists, and Geraldine, thank you very much as well for moderating that session. Really appreciated. So we're moving straight on to the next panel. So if I can invite our panelists to step down, and we're going to do a quick switch onto our next panel, which is also going to be focusing on investment. It's going to be looking specifically at addressing the private investment funding gap. Just whilst we're doing the switch around here, just one thing to mention, because I have been asked by a few people about recordings for the sessions. So just to remind everybody that all of the sessions that are taking place yesterday and today are being recorded, and they will be available to you. So you can look at those sessions. Those will be available via our YouTube website. So we'll be sending a link to that afterwards. But for now, as I said, please don't go anywhere. Please, we're going to be moving straight on to our next session. So if I could invite Pierre, who's already made it up here. Welcome, Pierre. And the rest of the panelists to come and join us on the stage. And we're going to be moving straight on to our next panel. So I could invite Ignacio, Stella, Matteo, Damien, and Lutz to come and please join us on the stage. Perfect. It looks like we're just about set. So, Pierre, I will pass over to you. Yeah.
Yes, so thank you very much for being here on this additional session where we're going to try to address investment points, addressing the private investment funding gap, and how with the variety of actors here, we can actually see whether or not we see this gap happening or not happening. I would like, before we start and before I introduce the panel members here, to steal a couple of minutes from you, just to share a few figures, which I believe are interesting to have a look at. You know, Geraldine did it, so I want to do it as well, sharing some figures with you, so I can move without further ado to the next slide. This is the panorama of creation of startups. So you see the new space startups creation year by year in red. So you see that there's been an acceleration around 2012, and then now it's probably decelerating. And in blue, you see the massive amount of equity which has been raised by the companies. It's not the year of the equity raised, it is the company receiving that amount was created in that year. So for instance, the biggest histogram here, the first one, is Blue Origin, created in 2000, which has attracted 7 billion plus in equity. Overall, all those companies have attracted a massive amount of $44 billion in equity. And I'm looking only at the upstream and midstream part of the sector. So you see, this is a massive amount. But what is interesting to note is that if you remove the three bigger players, Blue Origin, SpaceX, and OneWeb, the total amount goes down to 24 billion. So we have a very big disparity of situations. I don't like seeing average figures on this, because when you have such extremities in the situations, the average is actually reflecting something which is not close to the reality. And if you remove those big players in the equity game in the new space, actually the average amount which has been attracted by every company worldwide is about $37 million per company. So you see, on one hand, you have Blue Origin, 7 billion, SpaceX, 9 billion, and then you have an average amount of company, which are about $37 million each. So not so many super big. The situation of Europe, well, it's just a scaled down image of the world. And we see that in Europe, we have a very vivid creation. And if you look at the number of companies which are created every year, we have a peak in 2018 with almost 55 companies created in the year. We have today an ecosystem of the European new space in the upstream only. Again, I'm focusing only on that, which is in the order of 400 companies, which is quite significant. And the bigger player in Europe, of course, is OneWeb, which is the big figure that you see in the middle there in terms of equity raised. And the average amount, if you remove the big player, OneWeb, is about $27 million, which is average equity raised by the European players there. And then I want to conclude this little presentation with this roundup situation of the situation of new space companies in Europe, where you can actually see in one single chart the amount raised, which is the value in green. And you see that in the midstream, with the impact of OneWeb, this is where we see most of the money being attracted today in Europe. Then you see the total employment estimate of those companies, and we see that in Europe, the new space players have attracted now more than 5,000 employees in total, which is a significant amount, which represents a growth of 10% of the total employment of the European space industry in the past 5 to 6 years, which is a significant amount. And then, of course, you see the bar in the number of companies. And when you compare the number of companies, the employment figure, and the equity figure, you see very unbalanced situations. And you see probably areas in which the employment is exceeding what we can measure with the equity raised. And I would like to insist a lot on that. The capacity of a company to produce innovation is as much linked to the amount of people they have, the employment they can generate, and to the capital they manage to raise. So capital is one aspect, but human capital is an important one. And this is what we believe is an important metric that we would like to reinsert in the approach to evaluating the potential of new space players in Europe. So now I'm going to turn to the panel, and we are very happy to have gathered here different representative of what the investment value chain represents. So I don't know if I need to start. I would say from the top, we have the European Investment Council, which is there as the facilitator for creating opportunities to support and invest in new projects, innovation, and they have a specific space arm, which is represented today by Stella, which is there with us. Then we have the investment community with two different dimensions from the investment community. We have one VC and we have one corporate finance representative. So we have Matteo and Lutz, which are there. And then last but not least, at the edge of this stage here, we have two new space, new companies, new promoters, and also they will be able also to bring their own perspective on bringing in capital and also trying to highlight the difference, which is where do you get the money from? Do you get it as a loan? Do you get it from a bank? Do you get it from a VC? Do you get it from a corporate partner? Or do you get it from a potential co-investor in your project, which would be the beneficiary of it? So we will try to address those points. We have three key topics today. Do we have a funding gap? How difficult it is to raise funds, to fund the new ventures, as well as, funding directly as a new venture, attracting funds. And then we will have a look at what opportunities Europe is offering, which is basically a two-dimensional element. We have opportunities for investors. So is the European environment a solid, attractive environment for investors in space, but also is Europe providing the right opportunities to leverage funds and bring in capital? So I'm going to stop the presentation here. I don't know if I need to push a button there. I think we can leave this one here. And I will be moving. The audio is much different here. I will be moving here to the session. So we would like to try and split our time in three. So before we start, I would like to go through the panel here and ask you to introduce briefly yourself, say who you are, and how do you situate yourself in this investment ecosystem, which I briefly mentioned. So I will start from the right. Please, Matteo Cascinari from Primo Space. 2 words of introduction, please.
Yes, Matteo Cascinari, general partner of Primo Space. Primo Space is an Italian fund, venture capital fund investing only in space and space-related activities, quite focused on Italy and Europe. Our ticket goes from 0 to 5 million for the first investments, and we can go up until 15 million in one single company. At the end of our story, we would create a portfolio of 20-25 companies.
Thank you very much. And one more word I think I would like to add for you is that you are partnering with the European institutions, because if I understand well, you are working also, you are investing, you are receiving investment from the European Investment Bank, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you very much. Then we have Stella. Please introduce yourself from the European Innovation Council and an old friend of mine.
Thank you, Pierre. My name is Stella Tkachova, and I'm the program manager for the European Innovation Council. The EIC is an executive agency created 2 years ago, which invests in high-risk breakthrough innovations from very low TRL to very high. And as a program manager, I manage a portfolio of space projects from very low to very high TRL. So it's a pleasure for me to speak here because I can talk more about our upcoming programs.
Thank you. And this space dimension is very new, and you are now evaluating the first batch of candidates, right?
Correct.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Then we have Lutz Berling from OHB. Please, 2 words of introduction.
Yes, hello. My name is Lutz Berling, Chief Strategy and Development Officer and Chief Digital Officer of OHB Group. OHB plays very different roles. So we are this strategic investor, if you want, on the panel. We play very different roles. We invest through funds like Orbital Venture. We invest directly, sometimes lead investor, very often not the lead investor, and going down to pure collaboration agreements. So very different ways how we invest into startups, but always with a strategic background.
Yes, and so you see, this is interesting because there is a dimension which is often forgotten, that corporate invest also in new ventures. And we will be able to discuss what are the dynamics of that. And then we have the two emerging players represented at the roundtable today. So the first one in the order of passage here is Damien Garot from Stellar. 2 words, please.
Nice to meet you all. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Stellar. We chose the name, obviously, to have the favor of the EIC, obviously. No, but joke aside, Stellar is here to bring reliable, secure, and broadband internet everywhere to all vehicles. So imagine you making a call on your car and it doesn't drop. Sounds like science fiction, right? So, or imagine you're having a video call on the train seamlessly without any cuts. That's what we're doing. And maturity-wise, we've been able already to demonstrate on the racetrack in 2022 in Europe, the world's first automotive terminal, which is completely hybrid, cellular and space. And we've been able to demonstrate that we can provide this seamless broadband connectivity on the racetrack in Europe. That's a world first.
Thank you very much. And here I would like to highlight, because I'm a nasty person, the difficult use of the present tense. You will be doing things, but today you are promoting the future of your company, but today the service is not available yet.
Yeah, maturity-wise, as you all understood, we at the park level.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. But sometimes I have this little dissonance in my head, so I like to insist on that. And then to close the introduction round, Ignacio, please, can you say 2 words about yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Pierre, for inviting me. I'm Ignacio Cecile. I work for, a CTO at Reorbit. Reorbit is a Finland-based company designing and building communication satellites, small communication satellites. So that's our business, connectivity. And to this panel, I'm bringing the perspective of someone from the fundraising side of the question, from someone who has been dealing with or like working with VCs for quite a long time. And I'm trying to bring my perspective into this problem. I think that there is an interesting ecosystem of investors and companies in Europe, and there is some problem trying to get them together. And that's what I will try to bring today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we will try to organize a little bit our time so that we try to address those 3 subjects. So I would like to jump first into the one major problem, which has been highlighted a few times in the previous session, which is something that we find a lot in policy documents. Do we have a funding gap for new space ventures in Europe? What is the perspective on this funding gap? Again, my take on it is that from the average point of view, we don't see a very major difference in the average funding available to European companies. However, what we note is that most European companies, they go and get funded from US funds. And at least if you look at the funding mix from those companies, usually you have a lot of capital flowing in from the United States, so not really sourced in Europe. So who would like to take this first step on evaluating your point of view on the existence of this funding gap and how we can actually reduce? First, I would like to look at the funders here. And I would like to speak first with the Primo Fund, because if you want to be able to invest as a VC, first you need to convince investors to invest in the space fund. So today, do you believe that in Europe there is a problem in leveraging this capital so that you have the power to invest and support the ecosystem?
Well, I think the panorama is getting better and better every day. If you said the word today, maybe today it's easier. For sure, it's easier, and it's going to be easier for those who want to raise capital to invest in venture capital. I mean, in startups. So to create a venture capital fund, we started in 2018. At that time, it was a little bit less easier or more difficult. Also because we were an Italian company investing mainly in Italy, so it was quite difficult. Even if, I mean, in 1 year, approximately 1 year and a half, we could raise a 80 million fund, which is 86 actually. 86, which is a good, a good level for starting first team VC. It's a good starting point. I think it's going to, for the next fund that maybe we're going to raise in the next 2-3 years, I think it's going to be easier because there is a huge amount, well, not huge, but a higher amount of money that is coming on the floor from many different areas, the politics, the industries, private investors, family offices. There are many, many investors that are every day more interested in investing in space, because every day is more clear that space is useful, as it has been said in the previous panel. And it is something, it's a market that is growing, that is maybe it's going to grow. I mean, this is what the expectation is going to grow for the next 10, 20, 30 years, like it was internet 30 years ago. So that's why I think it's going to be easy. Raising money is never easy, never.
Your key talking point is space is the new internet somehow.
Yeah,
that would be the idea.
This is the image that we try to sell every time to investors, because we strongly believe it is like that, because it's an industry, a new industry, but also an industry, a platform on which new industries are coming up. So as the new economy was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the new space economy is going to be for the next years.
Just in 2 seconds to come back to my original ground-based question, do you think that in Europe, from your point of view, there is an investment gap?
Yes, there is. There is, because of the total amount of money that you can raise, that you can have, that you can access. It's a cultural gap, because European and Italian, even worse, are risk adverse, or more risk adverse than in the US. We're not used very much to venture capital. So there are many reasons for we're not so pushy on the innovation side. So there are many cultural gaps, many gaps on the financial side, on the cultural side, on the institutional side. We are every day getting better and better, as I was saying, but there's still a gap.
Thank you. Stella, from the European Innovation Council point of view, do you believe that there is a gap, and are you moving along so that this gap can be bridged? Or do you think that your role is just creating the opportunities, screening the projects? How do you situate yourselves in there?
Thank you, Pierre, for this question. So, yes, I do believe there is a gap, particularly on the upstream funding SMEs and startups in the upstream. I was also a co-founder of a space SME and startup, and from my experience, it is very difficult actually to do innovation, build hardware, test it, and in parallel actually develop a market, capture customers, and get investors to be interested in your company. So yes, I think for upstream space tech companies, it's a challenge. The role of the European Innovation Council is exactly this role, to help companies jump over the death valley, so-called. And until now, the European Innovation Council has invested through its annual work programs in a very wide variety of domains like health,
Just
biotech.
interrupting you quickly, you say you invest how much?
1.7 billion euros was our work program from last year.
That's significant, but it's
Impressive.
not all for space.
No, it's not all for space. So now we're working on the work program for next year, which will be adopted by the end of this month, beginning of next month of December. And I encourage you to look at it and read it, because there will be 2 space challenges. We have one on Pathfinder, low TRL, TRL 1 to TRL 4. And then there will be one for the accelerator, where individual SMEs and startups could apply for this funding opportunity. And this will be, yes, in higher TRL. So we do have our programs at the EIC, and EIC is a new player in the space industry, in the space arena, but we have already, through our earlier pilot programs, funded companies like the Orbit, IC, and Eurosat. So we do have unicorns. Our objective is actually to create a community, an ecosystem, and particularly of new space SMEs and startups.
Thank you very much. Since I'm moving here, I was tempted to jump a little bit, because what you mentioned at some point was the difficulty of actually, as a creator, to take the time to manage everything, do your project, leverage, create. And maybe this is not the best way of doing things, but please, Ignacio, I know that this is something that you raised when we were preparing this, the difficulty as a company, as a project manager, as a creator, to handle at the same time the amount of time required to do the things and to get the things done, and also the difficulty of getting the things funded. So maybe you can, not too long, but share your
I'll try to be
thoughts on
brief,
that.
but
Thank you very much.
Oh, Pierre, I haven't heard in this forum, unfortunately, a lot about what it takes to scale a company, right? I mean, it's everyone talks about innovation, synergies, it's easy to talk about that, but what about what it takes to run a company from Monday to Friday, right? And someone was mentioning, and I think in the previous panel that, or maybe it was you also, that you were commenting about the amount of people that you also start to grow as you get funds, right? Your company gets bigger. Well, there is internal balance that starts to, I mean, that growth in a way starts to kill the innovation, because you're also taking care of, well, like running the company, right? So that's why, and if at the same time as you're running the company, you need to go and pitch to investors and get the usual long list of questions that they send during the even the initial contacts. They first thing sometimes they do, I'm generalizing, I'm sorry for that, but sometimes first thing they do, they just throw this question, right? Like, answer me 50 questions. And then at the same time, you need to go there and, deal with taxes, So that is also something that I would like, ISA and other actors, big actors to like think about. I mean, what it takes to grow healthy companies from the very beginning. And one last thing about the funding gap, also something that I didn't really hear a lot about in this forum is, or maybe I would just bring my opinion on this. I think there is a bit of an over-reliance on capital when it comes to growing companies. Why we don't talk about also how companies can bootstrap themselves into some growth level that they can reach the level of maturity to then maybe boost it or accelerate it with capital. But somehow some companies, and I know this firsthand from people that I know, because as you can imagine, I know other founders as well, they center their models around believing that they will get money from somewhere. And they never think, or sometimes they don't think about the idea of trying to come up with something that could bootstrap them towards some growth platform, and then they could just boost it from there. So I think the growth of companies needs to be tech companies, space tech companies, needs to be discussed beyond just the capital perspective. That's my point. Yeah.
Damien, since you manifested your interest in jumping on that, I leave you the floor right now.
Yes. So to echo what Ignacio said, I think that at least for some of the space startups, the key is that we deep tech. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of money to develop this technology. And of course, we all startups running the company, our companies, but maybe the difference for some of the space startups is that it's really deep tech. So we need to apply a deep tech mind of how to make sure that we're able to convince investors to put money in our companies. And this is where the challenge comes in working in Europe, because indeed, as has been said, the risk adversity in Europe is stronger than in the US. The ticket size is also different than the US. So what does it mean? It means that when we talk about deep tech, we need to slice and dice the roadmap. We need to be able to show early on some results of what we're doing, just like what we did on the Hockenheim ring in 2022, so that people get reassured about what we are able to do. But doing this along the way, instead of doing all things in parallel, but rather in series, obviously, we're losing time. So that's also the issue that we have here.
And since you mentioned the dimension of innovation and deep tech, I think it's the moment also to give the floor to Lutz, because what you are bringing in from the corporate finance point of view is support to innovation. And I believe that the trade-off internally from the money you have available for financing and investing is actually driven by whether or not this should be invested into your own innovation schemes, or whether you should diversify and bring some money to the table of other companies, which I believe you see as hopefully potential partners, and not breeding with your own investment your future competitors.
Yeah, sure. We don't want to feed competitors. We love them all, but we prefer to feed ourselves. No, but our role is a bit a different one. Investing in startups in space means you invest in entities, in particular if it's upstream, where return on investment and cash break even will be far out. Very often longer than 5 years, sometimes even 10 years. If you invest today in something which shows in a base case a cash break even in 32, it's a bit difficult to find investors. What is our role? We bring a certain level of certainty, of support to innovation, and of certainty that the technological solution will work. So whenever we invest, we normally combine it with a collaboration agreement where we support a startup in reaching technical goals, mostly on an on-demand basis. So we don't enforce anything, but we are open to support on demand. And we try to bring as well a bit of market certainty, because many of these startups are working on market opportunities for markets which in reality don't exist. And where you have typically the chicken and egg issue. So if you want to go for whatever, an optical relay constellation, then investors might say, but there's no LEO satellites which can work with it because nobody has an optical terminal on board. While the LEO guys are saying, as long as there's no constellation for relay, why should I put a terminal on board? So this chicken and egg and this developing of a market which doesn't exist is very often a topic. So part of what we bring if we invest, or even if we only collaborate, is we are facilitating additional investment. We are caring about some of the risks which were very well analyzed on the EIB slides in the last session. So that's part of our role, actually. It can be combined, and most of the time it is combined with investment, just because, again, this shows that we believe in the idea of the startup. In most cases, the best thing for us is to be a small, relatively small investor, because if we would take majority, any other investor would say, hey, if that's such a great idea, why don't they do it themselves? So as a strategic investor, it's good if you are relatively low. I would say at minimum below 20%, even better below 10%, which shows trust, which shows commitment. But our role is not the one of a financial investor. Our role is a different one.
Thank you very much. And I think that we are starting to build up a good semantic environment. We heard the term innovation, we heard the term startup, we heard the difficult term scale up. And I would like to bring two additional points, which I believe are important from the promoter point of view, from the investor point of view. One is the break-even point, and the other one is the exit strategy. And I believe that there is some interplay between the two. So I would like to ask the panelists here to react on those 2 points. What is a good exit from the investor point of view? At what moment in time do you believe that your investment has yielded what you expected? And I believe that depending on the investor point of view, this is different. And from the point of view of the promoter, is the break-even point the holy grail of your project, or is it something that is not necessarily the main concern? You mentioned the fact that you are managing every day the company, you need to pay the salaries. You mentioned the tax, but I think salaries are important as well. And so I would like you to jump a little bit on that. The moment where you scale up enough, you get to the break-even, you get to the exit strategies, how do you actually bring this all together so that it works? Who wants to try?
Is break-even point, I'm the tech guy here, right? So I will ask for financial questions. Is break-even point meaning the point that you don't need any more like capital and you sustain yourself with
exactly,
recurrent
but the moment
revenues?
your revenues are actually covering your past costs and creating for you the normal operations, so that you bring in revenues, you pay the salaries, and then you make a profit.
Yeah, well, that's what I was kind of referring to with this kind of bootstrapping strategy. I mean, I would like Reorbit to be self-sustained as soon as possible, let's say. So that point, I want to bring it closer in time. The exit, I want to just push it to the infinite. I mean, I have a 4-year-old kid, and I have the expectation that he will work for Reorbit at some point. So that's what I want to build, right? I want to build a company that can last like 100 years, if possible. So to me, the exit point is I don't want to see it. So that's why when investors come in, the situation starts to change, because they might have different expectations, and that, I mean, they might want to see that point, closer in time. And that's where maybe the struggle begins a little bit. But at this point where I'm at the moment, where I mean, we have just small investors on the kind of the seed stage. I still can have that vision, right? I mean, I don't want to see the exit. I don't want to see it. And the break-even point tomorrow, if possible. That's my answer.
Thank you very much. But divesting is a necessity when you're an early stage investor. So how do you handle that?
Absolutely. I mean, we buy because we are going to sell. So we must know that we are going to sell the company. But most of the work is done in the due diligence process. I mean, we invest in companies that we think we can exit from. Otherwise, we don't invest. On the break-even point, there's no one single answer. It depends on the business plan. It depends on the business. I mean, there are companies that we invested in that we know that will never break even in the time span in which we will be invested. There are some other companies that must get to the break-even point in 2-3 years because their business plan must go in that direction. So, I mean, it's not a point. It's not a point that is common to any investment. The exit for sure is common to an investment. In our case, we are lucky because our investors decided not to push us to. I mean, we are not rewarded by timing. I mean, our KPI is not the IRR. I don't want to be too technical.
The internal rate of return.
Yes, we are, but on the multiple. So we can sell all the companies the last day of our time horizon, which is 10 years, and nothing happens. I mean, so this is something that reassure very much our relation with the exit. And we can be patient. I mean, as patient as a venture capital can be, which is not patient. But we can't wait. We can wait until the last day of our investment horizon.
And sorry, I just want to jump a little bit, but as a corporate investor, do you think that your patience limit is higher, or do you have also
yeah, I would say our patience limit is higher and longer than the one of most of the VCs. If some VCs have a 10-year horizon, this might fit very well with the horizon of a corporate investor. Where for a corporate investor, exit is a strategy, take over is another strategy. So it does not necessarily need to be an exit. And by the way, for the exit, break even is only one element. As long as you can drive valuation up, you can have a good exit even if break even is far out. So you look more on valuation of the startup, of the company. Honestly, there are some valuations out there where one can have doubts if they are justified by anything. But that's a question which everybody needs to answer in this due diligence process, if it's the right target or not, and what the valuation potential is, where the break even is. If it's upstream, as I said earlier, break-even points are normally far out. Downstream is a different story, but upstream, lots of technological risk, lots of market risk, and long break-even points. Still, valuations can be very, very good. In terms of timing, as I said, 10 years is something which is not threatening us. It's not a general target to be that long.
Thank you. And Stella, from the European Innovation Council point of view, since you have different stages of investment, do you also have concerns with the type of return which should be expected, with the timing of the investment? Are you also confronted with those realities, or do you have more liberty of action from that point of view?
Well, we are quite lucky because we have more liberty. So actually it depends on the investment in which program. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 types of programs. So for projects which are very high risk, game-changing innovations with the Pathfinder, it could be 3 to 4 years. So we give funding 3 million to 4 million to these
When
companies.
you say 3 to 4 years, you mean what you bring in is what you believe is a funding to keep the company going and promote the project over a couple of years, 3 to 4 years.
Even longer. We have some Pathfinder projects which continue even longer, where we have also not only SMEs, but we have prime system integrators with universities and research institutes. And actually it creates a long-term predictability and opportunity to grow. And actually from some Pathfinder projects, we have then 3 or 4 proposals coming to the transition program, which starts to help SMEs and startups to scale up. But the most relevant questions for return of investment and commercial customers is actually in our accelerator program. When the proposals are selected there is a very strong due diligence on who are the customers, what are the targeted markets, how do you want to scale and grow up your company, what's your plans, and so on. And there it's extremely competitive. But it's the accelerator program which looks at these aspects a bit more. But we're very lucky on the EIC part.
Thank you. Looking at the far end of the panel here, do you think that it's very important to have this kind of plain visibility of the future? Would that change completely your way of doing things?
Yeah, it's clear that when we start talking with VCs, one of the first topic on the table is the exit. So we're not even married, but we're already talking about when they will leave the house.
Talking about the divorce before the marriage.
It's not really a divorce, right?
What about the kids?
Friends. But I mean, I have an analogy. Some of us are trying to build bridges, and it's really difficult to justify to build a bridge by counting the number of people that are swimming across the river. So for this, yes, it's important to work with people that know what roads are, that know what transportation are. So with them, we have some sector validation. And to echo what you just said, I think that corporate ventures are useful in this mix. They're useful because they bring the sector validation. So when we talk about exits, yes, they are reassuring the more generalist VCs because they see that actually, yeah, it makes sense in terms of space, it makes sense in terms of transportation sector. So, okay, I'm willing to get in. But then there are a few tricks. As you said, we should be careful not to have the corporate venture having too much of a foothold within the company. We need to guarantee that we're not here to serve the roadmap of the corporate, but rather the ambition of the startup. That's number one. Number two, we need to have several of these CVCs. So we are balancing the influence of the CVCs within the company. And again, we're here to serve the interest of all shareholders and not only one. Now, there is another topic that you mentioned, Pierre, about break-even. I think that for companies that are trying to build new infrastructure, the upstream and so forth, there is an important element that have been mentioned at the previous panel regarding the commercialization support. And to us, for instance, it's really important, but because it enables us to use third-party networks, existing satellite networks, and to already demonstrate with customers what we are able to do. So that actually the institution is making sure that we have a price which is coherent with the price we're going to have forward once our infrastructure is there.
Thank you. Please, Ignacio.
Just,
it's your panel as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to also, like, now that I heard a little bit, the expectations of the exit strategy from, the investors in the panel, I want to highlight that there seems to be a misalignment between, someone was talking in previous panels today in this forum that they know the use of space. What is that we're using space for, right? And well, one of the uses of space, not only to communicate on the ground, but you're also planning to, get to other planets. That's part of, what we're trying to achieve. The timescales that I'm hearing from this panel about what investors expect to make an exit from is incompatible with the time it will take to create a technology to achieve this use of space. If I want to build technology to get to Mars or to get to the moon, that will take more than 10 years, for sure, because it's complex, it needs a lot of validation, a lot of iteration, so it's going to take long, unless we want to build technology that clearly will not get us there, right? So maybe, and this is part of what I wrote in that article in Space News that I wrote like some time ago that I shared with the panel. I think we need to bridge the gap, and I wouldn't call it the funding gap, more like the expectations gap between what the investors expect and what it takes to develop the technology, if the investors care about that. That is the part I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I want to to bring.
Thank you. So the time scale is a problem. Please.
But there are investors. Our longest engagement has been more than 20 years.
Great.
So
That's-
sometimes you need to do it. But the issue is as well, startups then need to care a lot about what is the market, where comes the traction from, is there really a customer, whatever kind of customer for that solution.
But the markets might not exist. You said that. So you said that the markets may not exist, right?
True, but then you need to be convincing that you can create a market. At the point in time when Apple brought the iPad, nobody had an idea that a tablet could be a nice thing, and it's a super big market today. You can always come with solutions where there's no market existing today, but there need to be clear indicators why that market should exist once you come up with a solution. There's too many startups which are creating solutions for which the problem is simply not identifiable. So at least there needs to be a way where, and again, this is something where a strategic investor could play a role, then convincing, let's say, normal VCs, if not only you say, you as a startup, as an example, you say, yeah, there is a market for what we intend to do. There is interest out there, and we can confirm it. It might strengthen your positioning to other VCs. At the same point in time, I think we are fully aligned. We as corporates, we need to stay at a relatively low level. Otherwise, you're not that interesting for the classical VCs anymore.
Thank you. So we have a panel which is animated by itself. So please, Stella.
Thank you. Well, actually, I completely agree with you on the commercial markets. And I think that's the big challenge for upstream space tech companies, that they're involved, they don't know yet their market, and they don't know that customer. Example, 20 years ago, commercialization of space station used to be considered as the most ridiculous thing. Look at today, what's
Including by
happening.
myself.
By yourself, Pierre, too. In any case, I want to say that commercialization of space technologies is of a critical importance for the success of the so-called new space economy and the SMEs and startups. And here now at the EIC, we are also supporting SMEs and startups with business acceleration services and seeing how we can improve and start, because I think for space tech companies, that's the big issue. They don't have time to do commercialization and they have to do that technology innovation and do it properly and mature their product.
Matteo, please.
Yes, my part of answer is that VC is not the only way to finance a company or a startup. So there are many instruments through which you can finance a company. VC is one, corporate VC is another one, banks, grants, family and friends. There are many ways in which you can finance a company. So there's not only VC, and VC sometimes is not the right instrument. Having said that, we can invest and already invested in companies that will never break even within our horizon of 10 years, which is today 8 years. We must be convinced when we invest that the company is going to grow his value. So if we invest in a company whose pre-money right now is 10 million, we must be confident that that value is going to be 100 million within a certain time. If they break even or not. And one another advice I would like to give to all eventually startups connected online, don't go to VC when you need the money. I know it seems strange and contrarian, but you should consider the fundraising and the relationship with VCs a continuous activity. So when you go to the VCs asking money, for sure they will ask for many things, and they will give you many questions. But if you talk with them continuously, they already know you. And 50% of the investment that we make it on the team. So if I already know you, I know what you think, I know your vision. Maybe I talk to you when I must assess, I have to assess a company, and I know that you see the market in a certain way, you know very well the technology. Half of the assessment on your company already did it. So consider it a continuous activity.
Thank you very much. So we are nearing...
That's, by the way, fully true for corporate investors as well.
Good. Thank you. So
unfortunately, because you guys don't want to do this. Huh? That's a not so pleasant thing, and you believe it's a bit even distracting you from developing your technology and so on. I would add as well, have plans for different funding scenarios. Don't believe that all the funding round will go through as you imagine they should go through. And then suddenly, as funding is not coming, your milestones will disappear and so on and so on. Have different plans for different funding levels.
So I need to interrupt a little bit because we're getting close to the end. I have one question that came from the internet audience, which actually I like a lot, so I'm going to prioritize it. And it's take a few minutes to discuss a little bit what has happened with the special purpose acquisition companies which have supported the early initial public offerings of space companies such as Rocket Lab, such as Satellogic, etc. And the question brought here is the bad performance on the stock markets of, generally speaking, those companies. Do you think that will create a more difficult scenario for funding space ventures in the coming years? Or do you think that, they're just specific to the case of those companies and they would not affect you as a company raising funds or you as an investor? So we have probably 2 or 3 minutes for that. So very short answers to this, very short comments. Whoever wants to start first, please raise your hand here. Please.
I think SPACs look like a terrible idea from the very beginning, but interesting in some way for some company founders. But I think everything in a way fell by its own weight, in a way that somehow those high valuations were based on nothing. And then as soon as the because as soon as you get into a SPAC, then you become like fully transparent in a way, to the public. Then as soon as people started to dive into the specifics of what was behind the number, there was nothing. And then that kind of fell by its own weight, right? And I also think that the SPACs were damaging for the companies themselves, because then automatically the engineers and all the people working on things that are still like very preliminary, because most of the things, some of the things that SPAC were not mature enough, they all of a sudden start to look at the, Bloomberg, dashboards, to see how the stock is doing. And I think it's a terrible feedback loop for the company itself. So I think it's unsurprising. I know that I'm talking from hindsight. It's also part of the context, the general context, financial context. But let's say I was not surprised by the behavior.
Peter, you had a comment on that? No?
Yes. SPAC, again, it's an instrument.
It's an exit, a good exit for the VCs that were behind those companies.
Sometimes it is.
In those cases, they were.
Yes, in those cases, yes. But I refer to recent SPACs. It's an instrument. You can use it correctly or not correctly. If you use it correctly, it's perfect. I think that when in recent cases in which they didn't have success, it was good and it was healthy, because it was a way to create a bubble. So when you create a bubble, you're telling a wrong story, and you are creating expectations you're not going to meet. So I think what happened at the end was healthy.
So we have 2 more comments arising in just 30 seconds. So please.
Okay, I will be very quick. The question is, are our space tech companies ready for SPAC themselves?
So maturity.
Exactly, the maturity. And I think personally, is that the best approach for them to get funding? Maybe there are many other ways they can get funding with less stress on the actual innovation and negative impact on the product.
Yes. So if they were desperate for funds, maybe that was the only solution. Damien, please.
So I work for listed companies, and now I lead a private company. And honestly, I'm compassionate for the founders that went onto the stock market with SPACs. Because financial communication has to be done on a quarterly basis. You complain about the fact
it is a pressure.
This is next level in terms of constraints. So, and in terms of costs as well. So honestly, I'm compassionate.
Thank you very much. So lots of frustration for us, because we would like to be able to address many more things. So next time we do a longer session for that. And so thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you very much for you being here. Thank you very much for Space Forum to organize this.